Alright guys, it's BLM here and we are back with a new video. And with Big Brother Canada 7 just around the corner, I thought it would be fun to go ahead and rank the previous Big Brother Canada seasons. So with this video, we'll be going over Big Brother Canada seasons 1 through 6. Now keep in mind, even the worst season of Big Brother Canada isn't a bad season. Even the worst season here is probably a middle tier season in the grand scheme of Big Brother. This video will have spoilers for every single season that we will be talking about. Alright, so with that out of the way, let's get started. Alright, so number 6 on the list, the worst season of Big Brother Canada as of right now is Big Brother Canada Season 1. And again, even though this is the worst season to me, it's still not a bad season. But to me, this does feel like the most inconsistent season. The season starts off pretty good with most of the pre-jury section of the game being very interesting. The first couple episodes are pretty strong with a great mix of gameplay and character moments. We're introduced to great characters like Gary, Anil, Tom, and Liza. The second and third weeks are also pretty fun with the Danielle blindside happening in week 2, and week 3 being the Tom HOH where he gets HOH-itis. However, this week is kind of ruined by the power twist that does happen at the end of the week that saves Suzette. It screws over Anil, who I thought was a fun character and definitely someone I would have liked to see make it further. And to be honest, the next week after that is pretty much the beginning of the end for this season. Tom and Liza, who are two of the bigger characters of the season and two of the main sources of conflict within the house, go out back to back in the double eviction. And this leads to a pretty boring rest of the game, where the next week where Suzette goes is probably the most boring week in the history of Big Brother Canada. Now, that is followed by the instant eviction, which is a lot of fun, where AJ gets booted over Andrew in a pretty close vote. But the fact that the producers had to lie to Topaz to get her to ruin her game by talking about her entire game out loud is something I'm not really a big fan of. And from this point on, the East Coast Alliance, which included Jillian, Emmett, Andrew, and kind of Tala, they were able to run the game from this point on, winning every single HOH. Now for another thing I don't love about the season is at the Final Four, where they decided, you know what, let's bring someone back into the game. Gary, who's probably the biggest character of the season, who was taken out at Final 8, comes back to the game at Final 5, and comes so close to winning. This entire season was pretty much dominated by Jillian and Emmett, with Emmett doing most of the strategic work for the group. He does make a fatal mistake though at Final 4, where he votes out Tala instead of Gary. And while I do understand his rationale, obviously it does end up costing him the game. Obviously the season also ends with controversy when Topaz votes incorrectly, which gives Jillian the win, which is probably one of the most iconic moments in BBCAN history. Overall, while I do think this is the worst season of Big Brother Canada, mostly due to the boring stretch that happens from the final 10 on, this season definitely has a great cast and is still a good season in the grand scheme of things. Alright, now let's move on to number 5. Number 5 season for me is the most recent season, Big Brother Canada 6. Now, the season is such a mixed bag for me, where it has some of the most interesting gameplay in the entire franchise. However, all that gameplay was on the feeds, and none of it was shown in the episodes, which leads to a mediocre season when you're only watching the episodes. Now, the cast is pretty strong, like most Big Brother Canada seasons, but I would say there are some characters here that are pretty forgettable in the grand scheme of things. The season does have a rocky start, with the first couple rounds of the game being pretty boring. And also there's the dumb public vote, where the public is able to vote in 2 contestants out of a pool of 4, which just seemed cruel and pointless for the people that weren't voted in. Now week 3 kicks the game into high gear when Hamza wins HOH, and leads to a really crazy week where Jesse, who was playing a very strong game up until that point, gets taken out. And it starts a string of interesting votes that happen all in a row, with Jesse, Veronica, Hamza, and Marin all getting taken out. And this is the point in the game where Derek and Kayla find themselves on the outs, but they're able to pretty much win out until the final 3. And along the way, there is the massive Erica blindside, which was due to the dumb twist that they did once again, kind of like what happened with Suzette in Season 1. Ryan was saved by Canada, and Erica was named as the replacement, leading to her going home despite being the clear fan favorite at that point. But then we get to the final 9, which I think is one of the most interesting weeks in the history of Big Brother to me, where we have one of the best moves I've ever seen happen. Where coming into this week, Johnny is a dead man walking. The social dynamics are essentially there's a group of 3 in Paris, Will, and Maddie, a group of 2 in Allie and Olivia, obviously the group of 2 of Derek and Kayla, and then there's Johnny and Ryan kind of on the outs. And when Johnny and Ryan find themselves on the block, Johnny's just such a clear target and the easy person to get rid of. And during this week, the groups of Allie and Olivia were directly targeting Paris, Will, and Maddie, and vice versa. And what's so great about this is that Johnny's actually able to convince both of these groups individually that it is better for their games to keep him in the game so that he can go after this other side. However, to make the move work, he would need both of these sides to vote for him to stay. He's able to masterfully navigate through this, and even by the end of the week, he has Derek and Kayla, who are directly targeting him at the beginning of the week. He has them wanting him to stay as well. The frustrating thing about all this is that none of this was shown on the episodes. The next round's super interesting too, where Johnny becomes the HOH and targets Derek and Kayla. However, when Derek wins the veto, he's forced to put up Allie, and with Paris, Will, and Maddie targeting the Allie and Livia group anyway, they decide to take out Allie instead of Kayla. Now this is followed by the triple eviction, and then after that, really the season kind of dies out. But we do get a pretty good final two in Paris and Kayla, with Paris being a pretty decent winner, which we don't typically get with Big Brother Canada. If I were to solely rank these seasons on the feeds, this season would easily be 1 to 2 spots higher. However, because the terrible episodes, which were filled with product placement and an inaccurate portrayal of the events, I just really can't put this any higher. Now we're at number 4 in the rankings, and we're here with Big Brother Canada 3. Now this is another mixed season for me, because I do think that this has one of the best casts in the entire series, and also has some of the most interesting gameplay, but the ridiculous amount of twists really ruined what this season could have been. As I said, I really love the cast, and I think pretty much everyone brings something to the table, with most of the players playing pretty hard and making some really interesting moves. I do think the season has a bit of a slow start, especially with the weird first week where they decided to adopt the Big Brother UK rules for some reason. And there are some predictable votes for most of the pre-jury phase of the game, but the season really picks up at the final 12 when Cindy with an S comes back into the game, which leads to probably the biggest blindside in Big Brother Canada history, where Jordan is blindsided in a 5-4 vote when Godfrey looked like he was dead to rights. And a lot of this comes from very poor gameplay from Zach and Jordan. Obviously, the twist of Cindy coming back is not great for them either, as this move wouldn't have happened without that. And Godfrey, who turns out to be one of the best players in Big Brother Canada history, definitely wouldn't have been that if it wasn't for this move being made, where he potentially could have gone home way too soon. This is also one of my favorite moments in Big Brother Canada history, where there's this shot that's online where it shows almost everyone being surprised, and then there's Godfrey jumping in the air. It's just such a fun moment. Now for the next couple votes, we do get a couple more boring votes with Cindy and Bobby going out. But then we get the triple eviction, which is another one of the greatest moments in Big Brother Canada history, where Brittany wins HOH, puts up Zach, Kevin, and Pilar on the block, with Zach and Kevin being the very clear targets. But when Bruno wins veto, he makes the brilliant move of using the veto on Zach. It's really such a great move, and especially when you have to take into consideration that he had to use it immediately after he won it. He didn't really have much time to think about it. He just did it. And it's a great move because, one, it keeps Zach in the game, who's this massive target, but it also earns Zach's trust to where Bruno won't be a target of him for a little while. And then this double eviction gets even better when Sarah accidentally votes Willow out, who's one of her closest allies. If she had known where the votes were going, she could have easily saved her. But then we move on to the final 7, and this is where the season goes a bit downhill. Brittany is given the power by Canada as essentially a coup d'etat, and where she was very clearly going home, she's able to use this power to take out Bruno. Which sucks because Bruno was playing such a great game up to this point, and was positioned very well to where he could have won out at the end. Now the rest of the season plays out pretty standardly, where there are two sides and they go after each other. However, Godfrey's able to play this endgame so perfectly, where he's perfectly positioned in the middle and is able to flip back and forth between the sides. And it's such a shame that the jury didn't know how great of a game Godfrey was playing, as obviously the end result is that he loses in a jury vote at the end due to the perception that Sarah played a better game. The final 3 of the season, though, is very interesting. I think it's one of the few times where each of the 3 contestants could have won the game depending on the result of the final 3 HOH. Obviously, the result that happened was Godfrey taking Sarah and losing to her in a 7-2 vote. However, from post-game press, we've learned that if Godfrey had taken Ashley, he would have beat her in a 5-4 vote. And another really interesting thing too is that if Ashley had won HOH and taken Sarah, Ashley would have beaten Sarah in a 5-4 vote. And Sarah is easily one of the luckiest winners in the history of Big Brother, where she made a lot of massive strategic mistakes. It seemed like right after those mistakes were made, a twist would happen that would correct that. Overall, the season is a mixed bag. Again, it has some of the greatest moments in the history of Big Brother Canada, with the Jordan blindside, with the triple eviction. It also has one of the most game-savvy casts we've seen. However, it is ruined by the massive amount of twists, with the twists happening pretty much every single week, which screwed up the games of the better players in the house, and led to the season pretty much becoming a fan favorite competition. Alright, now we're moving on to number 3, which I think is a pretty underrated season, and that is Big Brother Canada Season 4. Now, BBCAN 4 gets a pretty bad rap, a lot of it coming from its pretty disappointing ending. And its pretty mixed cast doesn't help things either. However, if you look at the gameplay and everything that happens before the end game, you realize that the season is actually filled with fun gameplay and fun blindsides. Now, as I said about the cast, I do think this is the worst cast in BBCAN history, and it's not really even close. There are obviously some big characters. There's Tim, Nikki, Cassandra, but really without them, this season would be extremely dry, with most of the cast being pretty forgettable. I mean, you have people like Paige, Sherry, Christine, Raul, Maddie, Ramsey. The gameplay of the season is where the season shines, though. Where right from the beginning, there's two pretty solid sides pitted against each other. However, neither of them make up the majority, so there's this solid group in the middle. And this middle group is able to dominate most of the pre-jury phase, leading to the boots of some weaker players like Paige, Sherry, and Christine, while leaving some big threats in the game so that they can go after each other. This is another season where they decided to add 2 people a week into the season, which is something I'm not a big fan of. However, this is probably the season that does it the best, because these 2 people who enter late are international players. And the 2 international players here are the 2 most interesting people on the season, being Tim Dormer and Nikki Graham. Now, I really dislike the fake eviction twist that does happen after the 4th boot, where Kelsey goes out first and then Levita goes out in the double eviction. Well, they're stuck in a room watching live feeds for a week, and eventually one is able to re-enter the game, that being Kelsey. This really ends up screwing Mitch, who is definitely the best player of the season up to this point, being the main orchestrator behind this middle group jumping back and forth. Speaking of Mitch, at this point in the game, Mitch and Tim are pretty much in a war over control for the game. And during this week where Dallas does go home, Mitch is able to completely outplay Tim. But obviously with the twist being involved, Tim is able to get Mitch out the next week, which opens up the game for Tim, allowing him to make it to Final 3. The game does slow down a bit after Mitch's eviction though, with Raul and Maddie going home back to back, which were pretty boring results, though there is some terrible gameplay during these weeks, so at least that's interesting. But then we get to the double eviction, which is a lot of fun, where Jared is finally taken out, and this is followed by the Pax Bros winning HOH, their target being Tim. However, Cassandra is able to trick them to not putting her up, and when she wins veto, she's able to use it on Tim, keeping them both safe. And this is also where we get the infamous moment from the Pax Bros, where they try to nominate themselves. However, because of the rules of Big Brother Canada, they cannot. But from after the double eviction, the endgame was poised for the 3 fan favorites of the season, Tim, Cassandra, and Joel, with the 2 outsiders being the Pax Bros and Kelsey. The Pax Bros and Kelsey are actually able to win out, leading to the Pax Bros winning the game, which most people consider a disappointing ending. Speaking of the Pax Bros, I haven't talked about this yet. The Pax Bros are 2 brothers who came into the game and played the game as one individual. I actually don't mind this twist. However, I do think Nick is overall the much better player over Phil, and I do feel like if they were playing individually, Nick probably still wins the season with his comp wins, while Phil probably goes out much earlier. Overall, BBCAN 4 is a pretty fun season with some really interesting social dynamics and gameplay. However, it is harmed by its mediocre cast and poor results. Now we're down to the final 2. And I think my top 2 seasons of Big Brother Canada are pretty much the consensus top 2. However, I do think my number 1 is different than most people. So here at number 2 is Big Brother Canada 2. Big Brother Canada 2 is pretty much universally looked at as the best season of Big Brother Canada and one of the best seasons of Big Brother ever. I mean, it's a great season with a great cast and some really rootable underdogs. However, the season certainly isn't perfect. The cast is definitely what makes this season so great. There's so many iconic characters. I mean, we got John, Netta, Sabrina, Heather, Adele, Arlie, Kenny, Paul, Ika. I mean, there's just so many people on this season that are super memorable. However, I do think this season gets a bit of a slow start. I do think the first 2 rounds of the game are pretty And they also do this stupid Canada votes in one person thing where Alison is able to join the game. However, she's always looked at as like the new girl and is never able to really ingratiate herself within the house. But we do get to weeks 3 and 4, which are both pretty fun. A lot of that being due to Ika. Ika really takes the spotlight here by winning HOH and makes a pretty terrible move. She puts up Heather and Paul on the block. Heather being someone she just personally doesn't like, and Paul being someone who could have potentially been her ally. And when Paul goes home, this leads to her being taken out the very next week, where she is blindsided by her own ally. However, obviously, during this week, we get the iconic moment of Ika shredding the letters, which is probably one of my favorite character moments in Big Brother Canada history. After Ika's eviction, we get Canada's HOH, which was a twist where Canada got to decide the nominees. And this completely changes the game and gives all the momentum to the underdogs, being John, Netta, Heather, and Adele. While obviously I like the turn that the season takes here, I don't love that it didn't happen naturally. The next few rounds are pretty much the peak of the season, where Arlie decides to flip against his original alliance and side with the underdogs to take out Andrew, Sarah, and Kenny, only to be blindsided the very next week. Now, the Arlie boot is probably the most interesting part of the entire season, where Sabrina and Rochelle were on the block. John wins the veto, uses it on Rochelle to put up Arlie. However, Allison found the secret power of veto earlier in the season, which I really love this twist by the way, and wish it was utilized more, but she uses it on Sabrina, forcing John to put up one of his own allies in Adele. Now with 5 people voting, Allison, Sabrina, and Rochelle had the votes. They could decide who went home, and if they had kept Arlie, they could have completely flipped the game and put the numbers on their side. However, instead, due to John and Netta's strong gameplay that week, Allison, Sabrina, and Rochelle decide Arlie's too sketchy and decide to vote him out, leading to their own evictions where Allison and Rochelle are the next 2 boots, though Sabrina doesn't obviously make it to the final 2. Yeah, the rest of the game plays out pretty standardly. We do get the final 3 of John and Netta, who were a duo from the very beginning, and Sabrina, the GOAT of the season. And when John wins final HOH, he makes the biggest move of the season by voting out Netta, which is another all-time great moment for Big Brother Canada, and a move that was pretty unexpected for live feeders considering feeds cut the week before, and we didn't see anything that would suggest that John was about to take out Netta. Now, John is probably the best winner of Big Brother Canada, and to be honest, it's not really close, but even saying that, his game is far from perfect, considering he was greatly helped by the Canada HOH, and also needed to win out to make it to the end. Overall, Big Brother Canada 2 is a fantastic season. However, I do think there's a couple slower rounds there that keep it from being my #1 season of Big Brother Canada ever. Alright, now it's time to talk about the final season. My favorite season of Big Brother Canada of all time is BBCAN 5. And for me, the main reason why I feel like this is the best season is because I feel like it's far and away the most consistent. While a season like BBCAN 2 might be more iconic, I feel like there's a couple slower weeks that really bring the season down a little bit. However, I don't feel like this season has that. So essentially, this season is a fans versus favorite season, and I was actually really happy with the returnees from this season. I mean, Gary, Netta, Ika, Kevin, and Cassandra were pretty much locks from the beginning. I was really happy they brought Bruno back because I thought he was a great player and someone that really got screwed over on his season. And then Dallas, while he might not be the most likable person in the world, I do feel like he's a fun character. And then Cindy, to be honest, I never really cared for her, but I do understand why they brought her back. All the returnees brought something to the table this season. The newbies are a bit more mixed. I feel like there's some forgettable people like Jackie, Emily, and Mark. Then I feel like the other 5 in Karen, Demetrius, Dylan, Dre, and William, I feel like they were pretty good casting choices. But the main reason why I love this season so much is the way it plays out. We start off this season with a ridiculous vote where it's a 7-6 vote where the plan changes at the very last second. We follow this up with 3 consecutive returnees going home, with Dallas, who makes a big splash on his way out, trying to blow up the house, and then 2 fan favorites in Cassandra and Gary going out. And while the Dallas and Cassandra boot weeks were pretty interesting, the Gary one is probably the slowest one of the season. And most of that being due to the backwards week twist that they implemented, which is a really dumb twist that benefited the majority and made it so Gary pretty much had no shot to save himself. The next week was the Emily boot, which was pretty interesting because Bruno came so close to being backdoored until Ika told Kevin, who had won the veto, the plan, stop him from making a really dumb move. And then we get to the double eviction, and something I haven't talked about yet is Netta, who's one of the biggest fan favorites in BBCAN 2, who became really hated during this season, unrightly so I feel like. However, at the beginning of the game, she was given immunity until the jury. And at this double eviction, the first time where she was eligible to go home, guess what happens? We have one of the best double evictions here, where Ika is able to convince Cindy to blindside Netta. In the middle of this, there's so much drama of Netta arguing with Ika, and Cindy freaking out trying to decide what to do. Now, this was a really terrible move for Cindy, and Cindy's known for making really terrible moves, as this pretty much screws her over along with her alliance, as Cindy and Bruno are the next 2 to go. After the Bruno vote, Kevin was on the outs. Bruno was his closest ally, and he more than likely goes home if he doesn't win any more competitions. However, from this point on, Kevin and Demetrius win every single competition, with Kevin winning 6 out of the 7 remaining competitions that he competes in. This is also a fun section in the game because Demetrius and Ika, who have become a power duo at this point, are able to claw their way out of very sticky situations where Ika was on the block against Jackie, survives in a 4-1 vote, and Demetrius survives the block against Dylan despite being the target that week. And Kevin, despite being the winner, does make some pretty big strategic errors here, but to be honest, it doesn't really matter anyway. For Kevin, at this point in the game, he essentially needed to win out, which he obviously ends up doing anyway, winning an unanimous vote at the end. Which for me, I really enjoyed seeing Kevin finally get redemption because you could tell he really wanted it. As exemplified by him during the triple eviction, where you could tell his feeling of redemption after winning the triple eviction veto, which is probably one of my favorite moments of the season. During this season, Aika was also a really great character and played a much better game than she did the first season. However, I do feel like her game gets a bit overrated. A lot of that due to the fact that she doesn't win in any situation. And a lot of this comes from her terrible jury management with people like Netta and Jackie. Overall, this is easily my favorite season of Big Brother Canada. There are really no boring weeks the entire season, and for me it was really fun to see all these returning players play again. And even then there's the new characters like Karen and Dimitris, who also make a big splash on the season. So there we go, that was my entire ranking of the Big Brother Canada seasons. Obviously BBCAN 7 is right around the corner at the time of this recording. And when it's finished, I'll probably do a review of it and see where it ranks on this list. I mean, Big Brother Canada in general is a pretty great series, despite some glaring flaws in the abundance of twists and poor editing, but you always get a pretty good cast and some really interesting gameplay. So that is the entire video. That is every season of Big Brother Canada. So yeah, thank you for watching.